Welcome back to Higher Exchanges. I'm your host, Jesse Redmond, Head of Investor Relations and Business Development at Leaf Brands. And per Morgan Paxia's request, the intro music was back. Morgan, what's going on, man? Did that make you feel good?
It did. It's like a nice mellow vibe to bring us into the show.
Yeah, exactly. Gets rid of the awkward dead air up front when I don't know exactly when to start talking because you hit this go live button and you don't know exactly when it's going to come on. But great. Good to see you, Morgan. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And we have a fantastic guest today. I was hoping we'd find someone that was perfect to talk about what the heck is going on or what the hemp is going on, what the heck is going on in the hemp space. And we have found just the right man for the job. His name is Whitt Steineker. He is a partner at Bradley. Whitt, how are you? Thanks for joining us today.
I'm better than I deserve.
I don't know about that. I hear good things about you. When you posted your name, there's people immediately in the comments saying great guest. So it seems like people like you out there.
That's nice to hear. And it's maybe not an entirely representative sampling, but I certainly try. And I'm excited to be with you guys. I've known Morgan a little bit and think the world of him. And obviously, you've got a great reputation, as does the brand. So it's just fun to talk with people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Whitt, first time for us talking, we were catching up a little bit backstage, but maybe for other people that aren't familiar with you, do you mind sharing a bit about your background and how you got into this space?
Yeah, I'm actually a reformed litigator. I started my career in New York for a few years, and then I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, which is near where I grew up, about 15 years ago. Got into the cannabis space probably 2017, and have been doing that ever since, and it's become an increasing amount of my practice. It's now the substantial majority of what it is that I do. When we have a practice group, cannabis industry team that works with our other practice groups, because we have about 800 lawyers and 11 or 12 offices around the Southeast primarily. So we do national type work. Our geographic footprint's more in the Southeast. And basically we know most of the cannabis regulations in the places where we operate. And then we put clients in touch with subject matter experts for specific questions that they have. Is it a tax question? Is it a real estate question? We'll always be there to provide sort of the cannabis gloss that needs to be there to make sure that it jives. But, I'm not a real estate lawyer. I'm not a securities lawyer or labor and employment, but we have people who are really excellent at that. And so working together, we think we can get people sort of best in class service at the specific subject matter, but also making sure that it's consistent with the cannabis rules. So it's been kind of fun to do that over the years, and it's been a neat little thing to see grow.
And was it your personal interest or more of a firm mandate that got you into the space back in 2016, 2017?
Me and a partner of mine, we were both new partners, and we suggested it. We could kind of see it coming. It came a little faster than I thought, and the Farm Bill was right on the heels of when we made the decision, and so we did it sort of unofficially for a while, and we had to have some meetings with management about whether we were going to sort of publicly have a cannabis team. I mean, I've been around for 56 years at this point in the deep South. But the reality is, I think by that point, even things had started the stigmas had started to shift. Even just the polling was shifting. And so they basically, gave us some guardrails, said, you're asking us to trust you. We're going to, don't make fools out of us. And, we try to take that seriously. And then try to approach it really purposefully and build it up in a sort of a respectable and responsible way.
And do you tend to focus more on cannabis or the hemp side of things? It's interesting where you are geographically, because I'm guessing you're in more of a hemp hotbed over there than a cannabis, but does your practice span pretty equally, or do you lean into one side more or the other?
As a team, I would say we're definitely sort of spread equally, because we have people and because we have people in different offices doing it. In Mississippi, for example, that has a medical program. We've got somebody there who does most of the stuff he does is on the medical cannabis side. When Alabama's medical program gets up and running, I'm looking for some wood to knock on, which could be, as soon as the next few months. I suspect I'll probably be doing, a fair amount of that as well. I will say that, starting a cannabis program in Birmingham in 2017, it must have been what Noah felt like when he was telling people that it was about to start raining. I mean, there was a lot of the work that we did, and by design, and this is what got the firm comfortable with it, was working with institutional clients at the firm. It had like banks, real estate companies, commercial developers who are, hey, I've got a strip mall and somebody wants to put up a CBD store. Am I going to be, in a RICO lawsuit if this happens? And we could get educated. So that was sort of cannabis work for, non-cannabis people. I mean, some of our earliest advice, and even today, was how do I not deal with cannabis companies? I mean, I'm not trying to get anybody out of business, but they're like, hey, look, I've got some rules that, I can't invest in cannabis companies. Can you evaluate this opportunity? And, does it run afoul of some covenant that I've made or some, investor agreement? So that's sort of how it started. Now it's more sort of at the operator level, and, some portfolio company type stuff. The benefit to our model is that we can kind of scale up or down as big as somebody wants to go. It's not just relying on me or a couple of people who, to have all the information.
Well, great. That's helpful context. Why don't I pass it over to you, Morgan, and let's dig into some of this recent news. So much to discuss.
Yeah, so there was kind of some news that happened recently. I think it's no surprise to folks listening in here that part of the ending the government shutdown included a provision, if I'm saying the right terminology, that included the potential eventual banning of, and I say potential intentionally, of intoxicating hemp products, and as some might say, like closing the loophole from the Farm Bill. Understanding there's a 1-year kind of horizon before that begins, but why don't I let you explain it so that you can explain it accurately instead of my kind of fumbling through it from a investor perspective.
That's great. And I brought, it's not all that complicated, but I brought some notes just so that I say the right thing as well, because there was no surprise that in DC there was coming a showdown between a number of different interests, alcohol, sort of the factions within cannabis generally, the hemp side, the marijuana side, and ideologically, people had certain beliefs, some certain conservative groups were in the fold as well, and even people who agreed didn't necessarily agree on how to get things done. And so it wasn't a surprise that something was going to happen, that it was probably going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. I think I was a little caught off guard that it made its way into the appropriations process and essentially put people in a position of having a up or down vote on, are you going to reopen the government? And if not, is it going to be because of hemp? And frankly, I think whatever had been put into that bill regarding hemp, it was going to get passed through. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to stand up and fight it. And obviously the language that made it in is what made it in. Rand Paul tried to pull out, basically just remove reference to any hemp provision in the law. That amendment was tabled, so there was no up or down vote on it, but it was tabled at 76-24, so sizably. And so just broadly speaking, there's 3 or 4 sort of key takeaways from the law that I think are important. Since 2018, everybody's been looking in the hemp world at staying under this 0.3% Delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis. That's the phrase. And the loophole, Morgan, that you referred to, is that people pretty quickly figured out that you could make products that had less than 0.3 delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis, but had other things combined with it that could make products that could be intoxicating. It didn't have to be, but quickly they figured out that they could make intoxicating products and sell them for, a pretty penny. And because they didn't run afoul of this 0.3% level, they fell within the definition of hemp. And why that's important is what the Farm Bill did in 2018 was make hemp an exception to the definition of marijuana. So if you fell within the definition of hemp, then you didn't fall into the, if you think of a just like a pyramid or a flow chart, you've got cannabis, which is a scientific term. It's not a legal term. Cannabis doesn't appear it is not a defined term in the legal code. And then two branches of the cannabis plant, which are marijuana and hemp, and those are legal terms. Those are defined. And so as long as you could get yourself into the hemp category and not the marijuana category, you didn't have hemp. Hemp's not Schedule 1. Marijuana is subject to 280E. It's going to be subject to any state licensing requirements that for medical or adult use cannabis. Hemp just floats on the outside, and it's essentially just probably like alcohol would be a good way to put it. I mean, whatever the state says, states were allowed to put more stringent rules than the federal government did. Some did. I was initially surprised, but then it became super obvious why a lot of states that had adult use programs were the first ones to sort of crack down on hemp programs, because they looked around and said, these guys, there's a little bit of hey, if anybody's going to be getting people high around these parts, it's going to be me. But I think some of that was well earned, because they had they put the time and they had gone through the testing and the regulations and they were certainly paying the taxes, and that is extraordinary costs that they were had to endure often for very difficult margins. And then they go into a gas station and they would see something that may or may not have been tested, may or may not have been accurately labeled. I mean, if there was a COA, you didn't know if it was real or fake. And probably the most troubling part of it was that very often there was so little, if any, oversight over that. So that could have been happening at the state, in a state licensed program as well. People could have been fudging or whatever, but at least it was a regulator who was going around, and there was an interest in some sort of self-policing. I think there's a lot of people on the cannabis side who looked at what was happening on the hemp side and said, this is essentially a race to the bottom in many ways, but it's a race to the bottom on amongst people who want to sell, what I would call gas station crank. And then there was some really high-end type stuff that, compared very favorably, I think, from a product profile to cannabis. And again, it's just an enormous advantage to operate in that world as opposed to, state license regulations and the taxes and things that come along with that.
What are those products, real quick, that you think compare favorably?
I think so. And this is, I'm in a little bit of a disadvantage when I say this, because in Alabama, for example, we don't have a medical program yet, but there has been an enormous adoption here, and I think in Mississippi, Georgia too, of sort of the lower dose edibles. I think there's people who are doing 10, 15 milligram edibles, things like that. Those were selling extraordinarily well, and the beverages are really have dominated, I think, sort of the southeastern market. I don't know what that looks like out in other states. I know there's different rules, but that's been where most of the fighting has been here of late, and there's been some pretty interesting battles in state legislatures with big alcohol. Sort of multi-state operators are certainly are certainly out there as people who are very interested in this discussion and, where it's going to go. And it's created an interesting division between like alcohol distributors who see this drop in alcohol sales and think, look, if I can put, a hemp beverage in the back of my truck, I don't really care. I just need to fill the truck up and make the money, and ideally not irritate the brewer too bad that they cancel the contract. Whereas the brewer, they need to figure out a way to stop having their sales decrease. And, one way is potentially, making it where people can't have access or have as easy access to a hemp beverage. So it's made for some interesting bedfellows in a lot of these sort of state house fights. And I think you see a little bit of that in terms of what happened at Congress. So it just to go back sort of to what is the core of this new rule. So you move away from this 0.3% Delta 9 and you say that there can be no more than 0.4 milligrams of total THC per container. So loophole closed by moving away from 0.3% Delta 9 THC. And I mean, look, I think the loophole is always an interesting thing because I think a clean reading of the Farm Bill in 2018 probably allowed these people to do what they were doing. I think if you spelled it out for Congress in 2018, because I mean, this was 2 pages of a 1,000-page piece of legislation. If you asked members before the vote, hey, can I, for 3 minutes, tell you what this is about to do? And by the way, I don't even think we all knew what the potential was at the time. But if you said, are you intending to do this, like allow for these types of products and beverages to be sold without going through sort of the same regulated process that is happening in the States, I think they probably would have said, no, that's not what we intend. But I mean, if you look at the words on the page, I think that's what the words allowed. And so, I mean, there was a lot of talk. I think to some extent, almost everybody wanted to close the loophole. It was just, do we close it for like, you can't do that anymore? Or do we close it in the sense of like, well, there's no loophole. Now we're just codifying it and saying, yes, you can do it. Because even the people who are utilizing the loophole, it was difficult for them sometimes to go to retailers like a grocery store, for example, who was not looking to be a cannabis dispensary, but it was very, unsure about, was very cautious about running afoul of the law. And what they'd say, is this stuff legal? And you could say yes, but the proper answer was probably it's not illegal. And you could tell they'd be like, I don't know about that. And so they wanted a bill that said, look, this is legal, hand a piece of paper that their lawyers could get comfortable with. And so even the people taking advantage of the loophole, I think, wanted something. So there's a little bit careful what you wish for in that aspect of it, but loophole, at least that loophole closed. No cannabinoids, regardless of concentration, that are synthesized or manufactured outside the cannabis plant. And I'm going to say this other one, and we'll get to it. No cannabinoids with, quote, similar effects or marketed as having similar effects to THC. That'll be determined by HHS. Because and that'll be very interesting list, assuming this takes effect. That'll be a very interesting list to see what is determined as having a similar effect to THC, particularly given all the different things that THC in its various forms can do. And then again, it's a total THC that we're looking at now, instead of Delta 9 THC only. And so being able to slam in a bunch of Delta 8, Delta 10s, or anything else. And it says whether naturally occurring or artificially derived. So even if it's natural, you can't put it in there. And so it also tells FDA within 90 days that they must publish, and I think this includes HHS, a list of all cannabinoids known to be naturally produced by the cannabis plant, all naturally occurring THC class cannabinoids, a list of all cannabinoids with similar effects to THC or marketed as such. And they're also supposed to define container more clearly, which, is often what you see in the regulatory process is you get a little more definition than in a broader statute. And that'll be interesting because as it is right now, it seems like it's like the innermost interior wrapper. So, if you've got individually packaged, 20 individually packaged edibles, you're looking at, and they're all in some bigger package that's got some sort of childproof container to it. Under this one, as I read it, you would be looking at that individual package. The one unit would be the container. But that's the kind of guidance that we're going to hope to see from FDA within 90 days. Although, if you've been waiting around on things like rescheduling for years, Congress can tell FDA they need to do something in 90 days, and maybe they'll do it. But I certainly don't think that there's any guarantees that they'll do it. If they don't do it, it makes sort of interesting about what impact, if any, would this have on the availability to enforce this law. But ultimately, I think they'll get it done, and ultimately it will take effect. But and this is where people talk about sometimes sort of there's like a year shot clock built into it. The year by its own terms doesn't take effect till 365 days after signed by the president. Depending on who you ask, is like November 11th and November 12th of 2026. And the law is passed. So it doesn't take effect until then. Implicit in that is unless it's changed or theoretically it could be, pushed out another year, have it extended. That is regularly happens in appropriations debates. This was the result of, something having been extended out.
Wait, real quick. Can it be totally canceled or voided or just amended?
It could be totally canceled. I don't think Congress is going to go back and say, never mind, we didn't want to do anything with hemp. And, everything that you were doing is fine. Let's go back to what the world looked like 3 weeks ago. I don't see that happening. I think, ultimately, that could be potentially done as part of a, brief, maybe up to a year extension. And I think the goal with at least what the supporters of this legislation say is, look, we didn't want to pull the rug out completely from the farmers. This was a Mitch McConnell supported plan, so was the 2018 Farm Bill. He championed the 2018 Farm Bill. He's the primary reason. It never would have happened without him. And I think he expressed some concern and even almost, borderline remorse at what had become of what in his mind was sort of more of an industrial focused program. And there's still, there's a lot of industrial opportunities, I think probably larger than there was consumable, but, he was hearing a bunch about all these stuff that you can get, and kids were getting their hands on it, and a bunch of, there was a little bit of reefer madness, built into some of what was happening in the hemp world. And I think it was very important to him, and what'll certainly be, one of his final sort of more prominent acts in Congress to take what I think he viewed as a little bit of a mark off of his reputation. So he was the one pushing for this, but also, Kentucky is where so much of this is grown. And so there's a lot of farmers who would be absolutely destroyed if they were told that they had to immediately halt production. This was basically like you have a year to get your affairs in order. That helps, but it's still gonna hurt a lot of businesses, and it's gonna get rid of a lot of money that's out there. There's a bunch of numbers being thrown around about how many jobs and how much money. I think a lot of that is overinflated. But in terms of the potential, I think hemp was probably just getting started. And I think that people who, if there was any compromise needed, giving 365 was a way for people to say, okay, that gives us a chance to get back in the game. We have a year to lobby people, and next time we won't have to pass a vote where a no vote means the government stays closed. And so if it's just a straight up or down vote, I think there's a lot of people in the hemp space who feel like they can get the votes that they need to have the type of legislation they want. And I think that's a wildly open question, because I don't know what the hemp industry position is, because there's so many stakeholders in it. It's a lot easier to be on the side of, hey, let's just get rid of this stuff. And that's an easy message to sell. I mean, people might not buy it, but it's not hard to explain what you want. But if you're somebody who, they all say they want regulation. That's what you say when you just don't want people to put you out of business. So you basically like, I'll take any type of regulation you want. And, you know, some of the people I work with, they mean that. They could, and they're well capitalized and they're responsible. And they're like, look, if we need to pay a little bit more in tax, if we need to, you know, if you want us to do our testing a different way, whatever, that's fine. But there's a lot of people who aren't doing it that way, and they're going to push for more lax rules. And I think these members, we've already been hearing about this for like 2 years. I mean, they were getting sick of discussing this. Now they voted on it. I mean, not technically, I mean, because they didn't have to vote on the Paul amendment other than table it. But I think they probably feel like we've done this. And, you know, I mean, it's going to be a heavy lift for the hemp industry to get to the attention and the institutional inertia that comes, you know, when you pass some big bill like this. Hey, can you guys go back and fix this thing right away? Because you also don't want to imply that they made a mistake. You have to kind of convince them like, oh, you didn't make a mistake. You just got put in the position of having to do something that you never, you know, you couldn't have voted no on. And so whether the hemp industry can sort of find enough consensus and cohesiveness to make a defined ask that can get enough members' interest and withstand sort of what's coming from, you know, the alcohol, and various other interests, including the cannabis side, you know, can they reach some sort of consensus? Or because if they can't, and if they can't figure out exactly what their ask is, and they can't sort of push for it, then it's going to be tough. Because it used to be that the hemp guys could say, well, look, we're legal. You're the ones who are actually illegal. I mean, your state might say you're legal, but like feds say we're legal. So we're not going to negotiate with you guys. But now in a year, at least, it's like, welcome to the party, pal. And you can't just, if you're a hemp business, you can't just say, well, there's nothing to stop us from doing this. Well, now there's about to be something that at least theoretically could stop you, but whether it'll be enforced is something, you know, we can talk about. But they're in a little bit of a different position now. So, and there's certainly a sense of urgency. I mean, the phone calls I've been on, watching people go through the stages of grief over the last week and a half have been remarkable. And it's been interesting to see the ones that could kind of get to the end more quickly and sort of see, okay, wow, this is real here. And we also don't have a year. This crop, next year's crop needs to be planted probably at the, you know, in spring. And nobody's signing contracts for hemp biomass if they think at the time the biomass shows up, it's going to be illegal. And so, I mean, this is one of those things where you're going to ask Congress to do something that it very rarely does.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. And I think, you know, trying to really think about this is, I think a good point that you're making in there is the way it was is not going to be ever again. Right. I mean, it was the Wild West. There was some good actors, there was a lot of bad actors, and it was just a free-flowing dynamic where there was just nothing really going on. And so to your point of the hemp industry's response is, well, just regulate and taxes, you know, whatever it takes is such a rhyme to legal cannabis, because that was the legal cannabis industry's position forever. And we've had some really horrible policies that have come about from that, because then, you know, states and are just like, great, we'll tax it to the gills and we'll put these stupid regulations on it. And, you know, which is bad. It's worse in some instances than it was when it was, you know, less intense like that. So it's be careful what you wish for there, because Whit and I were chatting about this a little bit offline. Is like, the question just comes to me is like, and then what? So we have this ban, and they're struggling to come together with what the next steps are going to be, and that's a whole nother can of worms on how to come to agreement of, is this intrastate only, is this interstate, is this, what kind of regulations are they looking for? And that's a lot to unpack, and that's a lot to ask, and that's been a big problem for cannabis. Legal cannabis in DC is like, how do we all come together on a single message? Because everyone's like, oh, this is for big cannabis instead of small, the smaller operators, and like, this is just, the oligopolies taking everything over, and it creates a lot of infighting. And I could see this just repeating in hemp. And you also have to wonder from the state's perspective of, why would we need to create a whole nother set of regulation and taxing, and to do something around THC where, in states that do have legal THC, why would we bother with that? Like California, for example, did a 1-year program where everything will eventually just be through the state legal stores, because that's like that. They're like, this has testing, this has regulation, this has age gating, this has the regulation that we already want to see. And that's, sounds like a good idea from a 30,000 foot level, but we still have a lot of issues around access, around too much regulation, around things like that have allowed for, rampant illicit market activity. So, this is a state level issue. There's a lot of states that need a lot of reform within their legal programs. There's states that still don't have legal markets. And then talking about at the federal level. So it's a year is going to go by in a minute.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's just, but everything you were just describing, this was, to us, to many, it seemed like this was like a surprise. Like this, all of a sudden, boom, this happened. But this was clearly very well thought out. They were very well ready for their opportunity to get this to happen, right? I mean, everything you just laid out, that was not just thrown in at 11:59, PM before the signing of this. This was something that they'd been clearly working on for quite a long time. Do you think this was, where I'm just trying to come to is the why of, like, was this driven from, we've heard states AGs have been, struggling with the inability to control things, but was it that, or is it a combination of that plus special interests, as you're noting about the alcohol industry making some, crying about, the decline in consumption with the younger groups that are looking for, alternative forms of consumption for altering effects. It's just something that was so flushed out, just trying to understand the why, and then probably will pass it over to Jesse to, on how this translates into legal cannabis.
I mean, there's a number of reasons, and it was always going to be a very close decision and a very close vote if this came to the floor of the houses in sort of regular order. And there would be weeks where there'd be language in that was like what we see, but not quite as severe as what was passed. And I think ultimately it was McConnell. And I think McConnell was able to call in some favors for people who, I mean, he had been the hemp guy. I mean, you sometimes you go meet with other members and they'd say, whatever Mitch says, or, whatever the leader says. I'm sure they were respectful, but, they just deferred to him, and he's calling on this thing that's kind of a legacy move for him. And I think I would be surprised if the people who sort of were pushing this the hardest knew 3 months ago that they were going to be able to use a shutdown vote as a way to do it. I mean, that ended up being pretty remarkable. One, I tend to think that we shouldn't pass policy changes through the appropriations process generally. I'd rather go through sort of the authorization process and have policy debates and things like that. I'm not too much of a stickler about that, but I think this gives you actually a pretty good example of like how that happens at the extreme. where you say, all right, here's a policy choice that really does merit like serious policy considerations. I mean, I'm not an advocate for either side on this issue. I mean, I think people should know the information, and then I just sort of respond and advise clients on what the law is on this. I'm not a registered lobbyist, but when people are forced to, when someone can put this type of language or the opposite type of language or something that made it worse on the marijuana side, and then put it in the form of an appropriations vote that's going to keep the government shut down, going on week 6 or 7. That's where you see how sort of how it went down and how they were basically able to put anything in there. I mean, there's some language in there. I feel like I've seen every draft of things that have been circulated over the past couple of years. There's some language in there about sort of the work in progress stuff that I hadn't seen before. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And they certainly didn't need to run it by me. But it shows you that somebody had a document that they were able to walk into somebody's office and say, I think now would be a good time for us to slide this in there as you're wrapping up, as you're getting that 58, 59, 60th vote that you're going to need, the 8 Democrats, go ahead and pop this in there, and then, let's see what happens. And like I said, Rand Paul tried to stop it, but that was never going to happen.
And Whit, I think the $1 million question for our audience, which is a bunch of operators, but also skewed heavily towards people that are cannabis investors,
Yep.
is what are the implications of this for the state legal cannabis industry? And in my mind, when I heard the news, I immediately thought this looked like a positive thing in that some of the TAM that we've lost, some of the money that we've lost going to dispensaries and the legal channels is because people are ordering, intoxicating hemp products through the mail or getting them at smoke shops. I realize the intoxicating hemp markets are skewed towards states that aren't generally the biggest state legal markets, particularly where you are in the Southeast. So it's not even close to a perfect 1-to-1 conversion. But it seemed like from that sense, there's some opportunity to capture some dollars there. And then you could look at this as being the first step in terms of establishing more cannabis regulations, more national THC framework. But the market's reaction to it has been the complete opposite. I should have looked it up before the show, but it feels like in the last couple of weeks now that or 10 days, whatever it's been, that we're down maybe 30-35% on the big cannabis ETF, MSOS. There's not enough liquidity there. Just one person unwinding could impact. So correlation does not necessarily equal causation. But I would say, broadly speaking, for me, Whit, the market's reaction has been a little bit different than what I would have expected the implications for the state legal cannabis industry to be. So I'm curious, what's your perspective? Do you see this as being a positive or a negative for the state legal operators?
It's a great question. I mean, in many ways, obviously, one of the most important ones that we can talk about today. I also checked MSOS this morning, as I have for the last several mornings, and but keep waiting for that to offset some of the other the hemp-based stocks that are. If it makes you feel any better, the hemp-based stocks are doing substantially worse. But I think your instinct, and obviously we'll have to see how this plays out. But if I had to guess, your instinct of sort of short-term decrease in competition is going to have to almost certainly have to be a net positive for the cannabis side. I mean, for all the reasons that you laid out. I mean, right now, I think in so many ways, everybody is just kind of either reeling or freaking out or crashing out. I mean, there's all sorts of reactions, but I don't think anybody's totally settled on what this means. I mean, there's people who maybe in good faith, but certainly some people who I think are just cheerleading for the sake of like trying to keep their job for another year, saying like, we're going to get this fixed. This isn't real. They had the gun, Congress had a gun to its head. Once we talk to them, like they'll straighten this out. I mean, sure, that is certainly possible. And that I think constrains people on the cannabis side from, I think, it should constrain them from spiking the football too much. But that's going to be a heavy lift to get done. And so I think there's enough sort of uncertainty, which the market typically abhors, that you're seeing that in the very immediate cycle. I think within maybe a few weeks, you might see people start to understand, like, okay, well, it looks like we're not going back to where we were. We probably won't go back to, we probably won't dramatically overcorrect that either. And so, yeah, for a little while here, the sort of a head-to-head competition, the old competition is either totally done or decimated, and we're set up for a nice little run here on the retail front. And so I do think that it'll be a net positive in that respect. This is where I should say, not only am I not offering legal advice, I'm certainly not asking investment advice. If you saw my portfolio right now, you would not follow any investment advice that I gave you. But look, I think long term, I mean, there very well may be some consequences to anyone on the marijuana side, on the adult use cannabis, even the medical cannabis, who went out of their way to sort of overly moralize and fear monger. And that's not to say that there weren't a lot of reasons and room to criticize what a lot of people were doing in hemp. But if you took it too far, I think you do run the risk of damaging sort of the cannabis plant generally, the credibility. Like, well, if it's that bad, I mean, are we doing enough regulation, or can we regulate it? I mean, don't forget, we live in a world. First of all, if you're selling marijuana, you're selling a Schedule I substance. We live in a world, during the first Trump administration, I used to say, where this could all change with a single presidential tweet. But now I guess it could change from a Truth Social. But I mean, he wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning and fires off, a public Truth Social to Pam Bondi that says, I'm directing you to enforce Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act as written, and that includes marijuana operators. I'm not sure. I mean, there's Rohrbacher Farr, and there's a couple other things that we'd have as defenses, but I'm not sure you'd want to bet it all on that. So I think there's a sense of, and you saw, if you watch what happened to the hemp people, you saw how fast it can happen. Maybe there won't be another shutdown immediately, but maybe there'll be, there's absolutely going to be, there's continuing resolutions on, 8 or 9 of these appropriations bills. So at the 11th hour or after another shutdown, will there be, some sort of erosion of hemp policy at the federal level, or ramping up of enforcement? That I think probably is some long-term damage that everybody will need to sort of do a little bit better job of getting the PR back up. And I think it would be in the interest of marijuana operators to be as gracious as they can be, and what I would say victory on the sort of this head-to-head issue, significant victory, and see how the next 357 nowadays play out. But also just generally, look, the cannabis plant, again, it's one plant, and I don't mean that as sort of big O, big P movement. I mean, it literally, scientifically, is the cannabis sativa L, right? And both hemp and marijuana, from the legal terms, come from that. And so we've got to be a little careful, I think, if we're worried about the interest of ourselves on the marijuana side, not to go too hard to the hole on how scary and dangerous that plant is.
Mm-hmm. And when we think about the dream for cannabis investors, I used to talk about that cannabis was a state-led growth story with a series of hard-to-time political catalysts. And I used to always say underline that hard-to-time part, just for the reasons that we saw here, in the last week or two. And that path on the political side, we would talk about Schedule 3. It would be a dream to get to States 2.0. It would be great to, Morgan, plug your ears, eventually get safe banking, and then down the road, uplisting, and that path that unlocks the value, expands the multiples, and then the states drive the larger TAM. Do you view this ruling on hemp as being a step towards getting that set of regulations done, especially read through towards Schedule 3, things like States 2.0? Or do you think it's rational to view this as the beginning of some sort of broader THC crackdown and read through this as a negative for the cannabis industry in terms of unlocking that set of political catalysts, the Schedule 3s, the safe bankings, et cetera?
I don't think it makes it. I don't think it forebodes necessarily any sort of broader crackdown. I don't, Congress. I don't think Congress is going to encourage any action on rescheduling, and I'm really not sure. I think rescheduling is going to happen. I don't think there's any sense of urgency. I think I don't think the president really cares. It's certainly not one of his top priorities. He also could wake up tomorrow and just say, I think somebody could mention it to him, and he could just push it out, and next thing you know, it happens in 36 hours. That I think that's another thing that the market doesn't really like, and I think you're on such a razor's edge when you're living in this world where you have the Cole memo and you have the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment, which for those who, I'm sure most people know, but for those who don't, is the appropriations rider that's been passed every year since 2014 that prohibits the Department of Justice for prosecuting people who are operating compliant with state legal regimes, and that's been tested in court and upheld on a number of occasions. First Trump administration rescinded the Cole memo, but has essentially continued to abide by it for the most part. But there's you're hearing rumblings about wait a minute, this federal prosecutor is talking about the hazardous health benefits. Pam Bondi, advocated against medicinal in Florida as Attorney General. And you look at HHS and DEA appear to be deferring to each other. It's sort of this circular firing squad. Basically, it's just kind of like who's going to move first. And then I think whoever moves first, I think people probably kind of go along with it. But as long as nobody's pushing it, I don't see a lot of momentum for it. I think it's possible Congress would go along with. For some reason, I'm just convinced that safe banking is somehow never going to pass, just because I feel like the votes have been there for years, and the fact that the Democrats didn't get safe banking passed in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, it tells you, with overwhelming sort of control of Congress in the White House, and I don't think it got a vote. And that was probably more of Democratic infighting and sort of the perfect being the enemy of the good. Whereas now, I'm just not sure you'd have 60 votes for it, but you might. And I think you're more likely to see Congress do stuff like that, States 2.0, than you are some sort of broader crackdown. Because the reality is, to some extent, Congress has already done the severest thing it can do. It made it Schedule 1. Admittedly, that was 70 years or 50 years ago, but they've kind of they've dropped the nuke already, and now it's sort of been just sort of whittling away at it. Maybe you don't see so much whittling anymore until there's some change. If there's a midterm change, or the end of this, what I think most people assume would be the final Trump term. At that point, it would not surprise me at all if this were a more significant issue in the next presidential election than we've seen it be in the past.
We're, as is the tradition here, Morgan, we are long on the agenda and short on time. So if you just give me one more question, I'll toss it over to you so you can get one or two more before we finish here. But I'm curious, kind of a bottom line read. If you were to guess, Whit, knowing it's not financial advice or legal advice, do you think we're looking at this, basically the same ban a year from now? And how would you rate the probabilities that they're able to get low dose beverages and or edibles back into this?
So I'm just defaulting to sort of my general worldview. Tom Petty said most things I worry about never happen anyway. There's that line, seldom are our greatest hopes or worst fears realized. That there will be something that prohibits the sort of total collapse of the hemp industry, because that's just the way things tend to go. It's so dramatic how strong, I mean, that is such a dramatic and abrupt elimination of what was a pretty substantially growing business, operated by people who had every reason to think that something like this could happen. And a lot of people told them this was going to happen. But I think they also probably thought, oh, it's not. I mean, because that, they're never going to totally shut it down. And they did. In a year, maybe. And, maybe not. And so if I default to my normal position, at some point in the next year, maybe too late, and maybe with a huge supply chain interruption happening at the same time because they don't do it in time for crops to be planted, something like that, that there will be some sort of accommodation reached where, maybe you have to enter a sort of a state program, or you have to be basically on equal par with the cannabis program in your state if it has one, or something, make it intrastate, because there's going to be something's going to have to be in it for the cannabis side for them to be able to go for this. It won't be like it used to be, but I do think there probably will be some change, and I think you've put your finger on it. It'll be at the beverages and the low dose edibles if it happens, but it's not a guarantee. I mean, I absolutely, I cannot believe we're having this. A month ago, I would have just said you were crazy if we were going to have this conversation. We'd be faced with something that was just this direct. I mean, it's not so much the outcome generally that like, oh wow, they really went ahead and canceled it. I mean, how they did it. It was a successful execution of the program.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the one thing that remains to be seen from my point of view on all of this is, yes, it may disrupt some farming, which could cut off some supply. But without enforcement, I think this will just continue to exist in just the illicit form, because I just don't see people just throwing in the towel. To your point, it's already there, and trying to go into all these bodegas and smoke shops and DTC and like all this stuff is just like, I mean, California DTC is still very much accessible. Anyone can go online and buy stuff and get it here. And even though it's not legal, it's banned, it's not permissible, but it still shows up. So
well, it's just marijuana now. I mean, if one of the things the hemp guys could say is, okay, they're not going after you guys. Now it'll be funny if they start kind of shooting at each other right now. I mean, because then you got to be really careful, right? I mean, if the marijuana guys start to say, y'all can't play over here, then the hemp guys are like, yo, we're exactly you now. Right. And then the response is, no, well, okay, act like us, right. Do all the stuff that we have to do, right. And then maybe we'll let you in. That'll be interesting to see play out, because, will they want a whole bunch of new operators sort of flooding the market. And I think in the interim, while that gets sorted out, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right that it'll be a black and gray market situation.
Yeah. Interestingly, we were chatting about this internally at Poseidon here, hadn't looked at Kalshi in a while, but pulled up the rescheduling odds. And, 2 months ago, I think we were still north of 50% odds of rescheduling before 26. That's down to 6%.
Yeah.
So to your point about the loss of momentum, that certainly is proving, at least in the betting world, and 2027 before 2027 is actually still holding pretty steady, which I think is interesting, because that seemed to make a lot more sense to me as far as trying to think of any kind of legislative reform heading into a midterm, I think is just nonsense. I mean, we're not going to do, there's nothing's going to happen. The only thing that's going to happen is will come from POTUS if he wants to do something for the benefit of securing midterm elections. But and rescheduling is his big carrot, and we'd all love to see it sooner than later. But it was just interesting on the Kelshi thing. But just in the interest of time, I know we got a couple minutes here left, and I just wanted to quickly touch, because we've only been really talking about the intoxicating aspect of hemp. But what you kind of noted there's this whole other aspect of hemp on the industrial side, and you and I have worked together on a company called Bascor in Montgomery that does just that. They're just industrial. It's for the purposes of textiles and other applications, nothing to do with anything intoxicating. And what we're trying to distill down is, what does this mean for hemp in that context? Because like right now, we're already securing all the farming we need. There's still plenty of farming interest for purely industrial, because those farmers were always growing that. It was more of the challenge, I think, with some of the farmers that were also enjoying the very profitable, lucrative, intoxicating hemp, where they were getting almost 10x per acre in crop value than they get on the industrial side. But what does this mean for the industrial aspect? It seems like it's untouched in this change, but does this change the perception of it? Does it actually increase potential interest in developing it? Because this is like this idea of like onshoring of manufacturing and applications that we have kicked out, right? Textiles used to be a big part of America, Berkshire Hathaway, like these were big industries that we just pushed offshore. Does this open a door for potentially more of that to come back and more interest in the industrial side? Or how are you seeing any kind of shift? I know it's been a minute, but I mean, what do you think about from the industrial hemp application?
Yeah, look, so it was expressly carved out from all of this. So the rules stay the same for industrial hemp. I think industrial hemp can dwarf what sort of the intoxicating consumable hemp could do, because to me, the addressable market for industrial hemp, or the addressable market for consumable hemp, are people who are looking to consume hemp, and probably for some sort of calming or intoxicating type effect. The addressable market for industrial hemp could be everybody in the planet. If you come up with plastic substitutes, clothing, oil substitutes, those are just people who want to buy products that work. And if you can make those products out of industrial hemp, and there's increasing research on all that stuff, as you well know, then that is dramatically larger. Now we've got to have the biomass. We've got to have the crops. And so there's where I think it's going to be interesting. Is there going to be, can we get the demand up from, I guess initially from the manufacturers? Can they go and buy enough from the farmers where they say, okay, this is worth it. We're not making the 10x maybe, but we can grow and these guys can sell it. And, we can ultimately, make some money here. And I think if you can do that, then I think you'll be fine. I don't think there's any sort of reputational hit. There could be a reputational benefit. I mean, I'd be sort of thoughtful and aware of how to go about it. But industrial hemp people that I talk to, and, Bascor has been very public about this. So this is nothing confidential, but like, they're always like, that's, whatever fight you guys are having about, kids and gas stations, like that's not what we do. We're trying to make like blue jeans. And our stuff is like 8 feet tall and looks like bamboo, right? You don't smoke it. And so I think if you keep up with the education front, and then you keep up with it, I think you'll be fine politically. And then you just got to, create the businesses that can actually do the work and buy the product from the farmers. And I think the sky really remains the limit.
Yeah. I mean, the farming economics, because we see this, I'm deeply involved with Basco. I work with Coleman, the CEO there. We're on the phone pretty much every day going through different things. But, from the farmer's perspective, it still is more lucrative industrial versus like corn and soybean. even at the prices that we're buying for industrial application, just because the input costs are so much less. It's like negligible compared to these other crops. So it's great from a rotational perspective. I just didn't know if there would be any implications around access to genetics and seeds and things like that, because will this
That's
cut
the
off
new
the-
loophole. You found that, so there's a new loophole. And of course there had to be, and that is the law bans you can't have viable seeds from a plant that would have exceeded the total THC of 0.3%. So if it used to be you couldn't have sort of any material from that plant, but now it says you can't have viable seeds from essentially a marijuana plant. If you do, forget about the 0.4 milligram per container limit. You just can't. That's just marijuana. You can't have it. But it doesn't speak to like clones and tissues, and so there's a discussion about, can there still be a dynamic market, for those where there could be sort of innovation and opportunities for people to develop new products that could be used really in the industrial sector as well. So I suspect that's something you'll see, assuming there's no legislative change in the next year. I suspect that's something you'll see addressed in more detail through some sort of regulatory act. Although, FDA waited 7 years and didn't really do anything last time. So, we'll USDA come in on this. It's possible. But I think it's going to be I think it's
kind of like verified seed bank or something, right? Where they're saying that these are okay, right? Or how else would you be able to prove that those seeds are in fact did not originate from that 0.4 limit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is, I mean, if I were going to put my money into something, then I think the sort of the more stable play would be the industrial, and just hope that it hits the potential that it can hit, as opposed to betting on Congress to take some sort of action. I mean, industrial has shown that it may take a minute to sort of get off the ground, but the potential there is to me is stratospheric, and a lot of the risk has already been sort of factored in sort of the pricing. So yeah, and it's now it's still not the sexiest, but it doesn't have to compete against its sexier sister anymore, because and now maybe it's attractive in the sense that it's not so worried that Congress has made very clear that it's all for keeping that plan in. So that it's probably, of everything we've talked about, is probably the thing that you could feel have the least risk of being regulated out of business.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be the case, and I mean, it's really, I think it's exciting. I love it. I love that aspect of the business. It's a lot of fun to be, having the cannabis side, but then having this, because it is truly so different, and the opportunity is, I think it's just an interesting time in America with what we're trying to bring back here and do. And there's like, CNBC just had their Invest in America conference, and there's like this whole idea of trying to create more action and with robotics and everything. Like there's just so much that can happen back here in the US, and the demands for manufacturing with people wanting to do this because of uncertainty around global supply chains with tariffs on, tariffs off, or however it is like, how do you do capital planning and all that stuff. So the innovation opportunity there is really interesting. And so but that's good to hear that that's really pretty well solidified, that that's not of a concern, because that space has been largely starved of interest and attention, because to your point, it's just not as sexy as the intoxication that we get from the consumables. So but anyway, yeah.
Speaking of intoxication, I assume you've got to run there's got to be some folding like patio table lit on fire for you to jump through for tonight's game.
Go jump on some tables. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go Buffalo.
That's right.
Yeah, I love your point on the timing that you made earlier when I hadn't really thought through that supply chain part. But if you're talking about the supply chain for all these products, those are generally, if not exclusively, well, not exclusively, but the vast majority certainly are grown outdoor, lots of full-term stuff. And depending where you live, those plants are going in the ground, March, April, May, depending on how warm it is. So that seems like that does maybe, expedite this conversation a bit, because you really can't wait for the last minute in terms of if you're a hemp farmer looking to put stuff in the ground.
Right. I'd say if you were trying to get some action, you really want to get that done. Absolutely no later than in the first quarter, and probably want to have a pretty darn good idea that's coming in advance, because that even is probably too late. This needs to be something that, if it's going to happen, is picked up, when they come back from their holiday break. From the December week, first week of January.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. This was a fun conversation, and there was a bunch more we wanted to get to. So why don't we keep our eye on this, and maybe we can have you back in the first quarter and kind of keep us updated on what's going on here.
Whatever you want. This is fun.
Well, great. And if you're an operator listening to this, you're saying, damn, that Whitt guy sounds smart. I'd love to hire him and have him do some work for me. How would folks get a hold of you, Whitt?
So you can Google me. You can also find me on the Bradley website, or you can go to our blog, which I always love to plug. It's the buddingtrendsblog.com. I think we're pretty active. We try to make it extremely user-friendly. We don't use Latin phrases. It's a lot of pop culture references, and which I'm told I date myself, which I didn't used to think was a bad thing. But we try to post on things as currently as we can. And so any of those are good ways to reach me. And I'm always happy to chat with anybody. I don't charge people for, phone calls, just to, I charge my friends or people referred by my friends. So I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah, that blog's definitely a great read, by the way. So I'll give you a little bit more of a plug. You do a really nice job. It's concise, it's to the point, and it's, good reading. So check it out. And I know you usually share it on LinkedIn too, but I know you've done a lot of coverage of, a lot of topics here in the space. And so appreciate the work you're doing there.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks again for joining us, Whitt. Morgan, always good to talk to you, my friend. Good luck with your big game tonight. I'll be tuning into that as well. Thank all of you for listening. Go ahead and give it a watch too. Go ahead and cruise over to YouTube. That's only about 2% of our views right now, which is absolutely insane to me. So if you guys do like to watch stuff, go over, like, subscribe. If you really feel spicy, throw it out a comment on the YouTube. That helps feed the algorithm as well. And we'll be back in about 2 weeks to keep the conversations going. The views expressed, I screwed up the disclaimer, the views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only. Nothing we said should be considered research nor a recommendation. And today, nothing's legal advice as well. All investing involves risk, including the loss of principal.